Hello and welcome to the Crimson Misery Podcast, episode 20. My name is Will Rainbolt. I hope you all are doing well. It is January 16th, 2025, and we have a lot to talk about. But before we get into that, if you are listening on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, consider rating the show 5 stars. If you are listening on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. Not in that order, I don't care which. So, um, Anyway, again, as I was saying, we have a lot to get to today. No Indiana to talk about, so my mood is a little bit better, and we have some bonkers basketball to talk about. Quite a few games that went into the depths of overtime. A couple games I'll get into in a second. Purdue, Fort Wayne, and Wright State went into double overtime. Winthrop, Charleston Southern went into triple overtime. The game I want to talk about, however, is UMass Fordham. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is the greatest game. I'm stealing a book out of Urinating Tree, the YouTuber who does a lot of sports content, mostly NFL content, but this is the greatest college basketball game that has ever been played. Better than Texas Western beating Kentucky for the national championship in an era of racial segregation. Better than Duke beating UNLV in the, I believe it was the 91 Final Four. Better than Villanova beating North Carolina on the Chris Jenkins buzzer beater. This UMass Fordham is the greatest college basketball game that has ever been played. Obviously, I hope you caught the hint of sarcasm there, but this is this is I don't really know what to say to introduce this game because it was so unbelievably insane. I knew from the get-go that I was going to cover this, and I will always have wanted to do a subject where it was the greatest game, or at least something to that extent. My cousin texted me uh, a little while after this game ended. He said it would be I'm like legally obligated to talk about this game on this podcast, and that is what I'm doing because I oh my God. The more I look at this game, the more I'm like, yeah, this is the greatest college basketball game ever. 9 total players fouled out in this basketball game. That is not a record. There was a game between Arizona and West Texas A&M at one point that had 12 players foul out. There was a game that was in 1952. There was a game between UNLV and Hawaii that was also 12 in 1979. And then for players ejected, it was, and this is from the Sickos College Basketball Committee, 18 players were ejected in the Florida A&M game. It's funny I'm bringing up Florida State when they had a bit of a scuffle with Pittsburgh last night, which I'm going to get into in a bit. But uh, yeah, if all of Florida A&M's players in this game were ejected for leaving the bench, hey, that happens sometimes. Um, but yeah, let's dive into it. So it started off relatively normal um, in an Atlantic 10 conference, which I will get into the other games very soon, because the Atlantic 10, as you will find out, is maybe not as good as I wanted to give them credit for earlier on this season, because oh my God, this is looking like a zero bid league right now. Obviously, they have to send someone in, but it's I'll get into it in a second. Um, who I think that team is. But yeah, it started off relatively normal. Massachusetts led Fordham at halftime 39 to 31. Okay, nothing out of the ordinary there. And a pretty good comeback at home from Fordham, who entering this game, um, 8-9. They are now 8-10 since they lost, but they were seeking their first conference win, 0-5 now, and then UMass also with a losing record, somehow a worse record than Fordham, 6-11 coming into this one with a better conference record, but overall, it's like the battle of bad at this point is what I'm gonna put this game as. So there were there were 79 total fouls called in this game, which makes sense. Went into triple overtime. There were oh my God. There were these don't look like real stats. Like looking at them, they don't look like they actually belong on a college basketball score chart. The three-point shots, at least for yeah, honestly, they look pretty normal. UMass went 11 for 27 from beyond the arc. Fordham went 10 of 34. Um, but you have Jackie Johnson the third, who led Fordham with 36 points, but went 4 of 18 from three. So you can tell that these guys were getting tired. And obviously, the big hero of UMass winning this game was Rasul Diggins, who had 46 points, 8 for 13 from three, 10 of 12 from the free throw line. But again, as I was saying, Massachusetts went 37 of 57 from the free throw line, 20 missed free throws. And that doesn't even take into consideration that Fordham ended up missing 17 free throws, 48 of 65. There were 37 total missed free throws in this basketball game. That's as many as UMass made in this game, by the way. Um, Good Lord. Honestly, for a game that was this competitive and this insane, not a ton of turnovers, only 32 combined turnovers in this game. Which is certainly interesting. They were getting their shots off. They were they were really trying. And yeah, so literally just like the more I look at this game is just more convincing to me that this is the greatest college basketball game that has ever been played. Um, so yeah, in regulation, Marquis Worthy hit a three to tie the game and send it into overtime. So Fordham, despite trailing, actually played a really good second half and looked like they were, looking like they were going to pull the game out. Um, but obviously UMass ties it and forced overtime. So in this overtime period, uh, Rasul Diggins for UMass hits hit free throws to go up by three with a second left in overtime. And that's not, that's pretty much a death sentence for like any other team to um, to get a shot off, to somehow get it off before the buzzer, and for it to go in is incredibly difficult. And if you're thinking that they hit a miraculous half court shot to force a second overtime, you would be incorrect because Romad Dean for Fordham was fouled taking a half court. It was, he was fouled on a half court shot. How do you not like? I get fouling when there's like 3 seconds left to not force to take away the shot and take away the possibility of you tying the game on a three-pointer to send it into overtime. I obviously get the strategy, but this was a half court shot. It was unlikely to go in, and you foul a dude shooting a half court shot with a second left. With 1 second left, you foul him. What are you doing? You had the game pretty much in hand. The shot wasn't close, and you sent the game into a second overtime. Oh my God. And that nearly cost them too, because Fordham was leading, and then Akil Watson ended up going to the free throw line. He only made one of two, but he still tied the game. But he but they that nearly cost UMass a win. But ultimately, in the third overtime period, despite so many players fouling out this game, nine players fouled out in this game. But Diggins, with his 46 points, and then Daniel Rivera ends up winning the game on a game-winning layup. Fordham ended up missing to hand UMass the win. It's what else do you really say in this game? Because I I wish I wish more games would be like this, honestly. I wish more top level games would be like this that would go into, four or five overtimes and have insane stat lines and insane storylines that ended up happening with this game. Um, because covering games like this is something I strive to do. And to have a game in 120 to 118 in triple overtime. And keep in mind, this is not the only game that was like that. There were two other games that went into, there was another game that went into three overtimes. There was one that went into two overtimes. And that's what we should have for even higher level college basketball games. And yeah, congratulations to UMass for fighting on and winning on the road at Fordham. So, with that being said, uh, so Purdue Fort Wayne ends up going on the road and beats Wright State. Uh, Purdue Fort Wayne is actually in contention for the Horizon League regular season title. Going to be playing for an NCAA tournament bid potentially. Um, yeah, but and this didn't feature anyone fouling out on Purdue Fort Wayne's side, and only one player, Logan Woods, fouled out for Wright State. But there were quite a few high scores in this game. Nothing as insane as what we saw in the UMass Fordham game, but still very competitive. Very gutsy win for Purdue Fort Wayne. Jalen Jackson, 30 points on the night, 3 of 4 from three, 10 of 20 overall. Rashid Bello had 27. Chandler Cuthrell had 20 to lead Purdue Fort Wayne, and then Alex Hui Bregsti, whatever, had 31 points. Not even going to try to pronounce that guy's name, and 7 for 14 from three. Uh, yeah, I knew how to pronounce his name at one point because I've seen his name pop up on like um, threads that are like difficult to pronounce, but I completely forgot how to pronounce it. It's like Hui Bregsti. I think it's Alex Hui Bregsti. Um, but yeah, so continuing my streak of not being able to pronounce names correctly, it's the Sam Cedar problem where he on the majority report he has had a notorious trouble pronouncing different names, which I feel like if I'm on the same level as someone who is well respected in the left wing media sphere, who is that well known, then I feel like I'm still doing a pretty good job uh, from not pronouncing names properly from that perspective. So, with that being said, let's go to the other game that went into triple overtime. This was a bit of a low scoring game for triple overtime standards anyway. Only 102 to 97, but Winthrop wins at home against the 5 and 14 Charleston Southern Buccaneers, and uh, just like again, this is what I want more in college basketball. It just wasn't like obviously this game didn't have as much going for it as the UMass Fordham game, but still very interesting to see different games like this go into multiple overtimes on the same night. So definitely very interesting to see. So R.J. Johnson led Charleston Southern with 30 points, and then Nick Johnson, I don't know if there's any relation there, probably not, had 28 points to lead Winthrop. Uh, yeah, good on Winthrop. Um, and again, just very, very funny how all of these games happened on the same night. So, with that being said, let's go to the rest of the Atlantic 10. I've already discussed the greatest college basketball game, UMass Fordham. What do we do with you, Atlantic 10? What do we do with you? So, obviously, Davidson trying to get get into the mix in the top of the Atlantic 10. Ended up falling to LaSalle. I thought LaSalle would be better than they are this year, but they're still 10 and 7. And with the way this Atlantic 10 conference is going, you never know with if they're actually any good. We shall see. Um, yeah, Deuce Jones had 23 points to lead LaSalle, but again, not neither of these teams looked really impressive on paper. Um, Yeah, I just Davidson is um they exist this season. Just kind of unremarkable right now unless they make a big run in the Atlantic 10 tournament. This is much better talking about I still like talking about the Atlantic 10 more than I do the ACC this year. Because like what do you want me to do? Talk about Wake Forest being 5 and 1 this year, which granted, Wake Forest might actually end up being one of the better teams in the ACC this year. Same thing with SMU potentially, but it just seems like it, with the way everyone else is in the ACC, it's just so difficult to gauge how good anyone is in this conference. I guess outside of Duke, who is there's a non-zero chance they go like 20 and 0 in the ACC this year. That's how bad the rest of the conference is. Like North Carolina is talented, but they also have a lot of weaknesses. So again, that's kind of where I will leave the ACC at. I don't really want to discuss any of the other mediocre games, but instead I'll talk about St. Bonaventure beating Richmond. St. Bonaventure might be one of the better teams in the Atlantic 10, 15 and 3 overall. They actually did get a win over Richmond, 63 to 49, and that's um, again that is a team that might end up competing with a team like VCU or a team like George Mason. And yes, I said George Mason. You did not mishear me there. For the top of the Atlantic 10 standings. So Melvin Council led St. Bonaventure with 14 points and 7 rebounds, and very very stout defensively. St. Bonaventure is at least the games that I've personally seen them play. We'll see how that holds up against um, other A-10 teams down the stretch. They're 63rd in Ken Palm in defensive rating, so um, that is where that's where their strength ends up lying. Not a great offensive team, only 108 in Ken Palm, but still, if they can ride a defense like this into the top of the A-10, they're in a pretty good spot. So that let's go to yeah, Duquesne went on the road and beat George Washington. George Washington 13-4 on the year, but then Duquesne is 7-9 coming into this game, and they're 3-1 in the A-10, which is just like my brain is having trouble um, like comprehending that, I suppose. Um, yeah, I just don't know. I thought George Washington, like looking at the record, was going to be a little bit better, but then you can't lose at home to a team like Duquesne. That's just not that's just not something you can afford. So Rafael Castro had 27 points to lead George Washington, and then Maximus Edwards off the bench had 22 points for Duquesne. Might be a sleeper pick for A-10 six man of the year. So we'll see how that ends up going. But even though he's only averaging 7.1 points per game, if he can continue with efforts like that, that might be pretty interesting to see what ends up happening there. So this is a game that a lot of people were talking about. George Mason, I'm becoming a George Mason truther. Uh, went on the road to beat Dayton 67 to 59. And Dayton is a long way away from when they beat UConn by double digits. Um, they just looked flat in this game. Um, man, Zed Key, former Ohio State Buckeye, only 4 points, and Nate Santos had 20. But other than that, I mean, Malachi Smith had 14, Enoch Cheeks had 11, but aside from that, just not a ton of scoring. Um, Not a ton of fight in the second half, especially again at home. You would expect to beat a team like George Mason, but George Mason again, Darius Maddox had 20 points for uh, for George Mason, went 4 or 5 from three, 8 for 11 overall, and Jalen Haynes had 12. This George Mason team, despite only shooting 7 free throws in this, there were not a ton of free throws in this game, only 18 combined. Not a ton of fouls called. It was just kind of hard-nosed uh, defensive effort. Um, Low field goal percentage overall for Dayton at 43. George Mason hit more at 52.1. So that's a big reason why they won this game. And they're 13 and 5, 4 and 1 overall in the A-10. So as long as they don't lose like games to Fordham and Richmond at home or whatever or whomever they're playing, um, if as long as they don't lose their as long as they don't lose games that they should win in this Atlantic 10 conference, they should be fine. And again, date, what the hell happened? You all were like you all beat UConn, you all beat Marquette. It's like how do you go from that to only putting up 59 points at home against George Mason? I don't I don't understand this team at all. And like granted, they can there's a possibility they bounce back, but again with losing like at George Washington, at UMass, a UMass team that is shown to be um quite the interesting team going going back in this podcast. But they play Loyola Chicago next. Obviously, not going to be an easy win, but again, Loyola Chicago is another team that had had some mojo going for them earlier on in the season, and then they've sort of hit a snag here recently. So yeah, again, the Atlantic 10 is just very a lot of parity, I guess, and I just don't know what is going to end up happening when it comes to the Atlantic 10. And speaking of Loyola Chicago, they beat the Archie Miller-led Rhode Island Rams 81 to 77. Um, the less I talk about Archie Miller, the better. But again, Rhode Island was another team in the Atlantic 10 that I thought, if Archie Miller were to turn it around, it would be with an Atlantic 10 team. Um, and yet they are 2-3 in the conference. So maybe not. Um, so well, I want to, yeah, okay. So yeah, Florida State. I know I said I wouldn't talk about the ACC, but this game had a bit of a an edge to it because there was a post-game scuffle after this one ended. Um, After a dunk that I forget who dunked for Florida State. Um, yeah, I can't exactly remember who dunked it, but yeah, so it was, if I were to be accurate with this, it was Malik Malik Ewan had made the dunk with a second left, and that really got Pittsburgh upset, and that caused a scuffle that caused the benches to empty, and I don't know if any punches were thrown necessarily, as opposed to like just um, pushing and shoving, but we'll see if there are any suspensions or fines or anything. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was kind of like with Ohio State getting mad at Michigan for planting the flag. It's like you had for Pittsburgh, you had 40 minutes to settle the score. And again, I don't agree with a guy, showboating and dunking, especially, you know, when it's against, Pittsburgh at home, and Pittsburgh's not like highly ranked or anything. But again, Florida State and Pitt might be like two of the better-ish teams in the ACC. And by that, I mean they're probably both going to settle for an NIT bid. Um, it's like yeah, I don't really have faith in either of these teams, but again, we shall see down the stretch. Um, but again, you had 40 minutes to settle the score, and you just like kind of lose your cool at the end. Uh, yeah. So, and then I guess like SMU had a game-winning shot against Virginia. Virginia is 8-9 and 1-5 in the ACC, so they are pretty bad this year. And SMU, not entirely sure how like good they are, but in terms of ACC teams, they're better than a lot of others. So let's go. Let's talk about some other notable mid-major scores. So Omaha is now 5-0 in the Summit League after defeating Denver on the road 80-62. Um, yeah, so Tony Osborne and JJ White had 15 apiece for Omaha to lead the way. So if there's so far, they look like a potential winner for the Summit regular season title. Bradley destroyed Indiana State 118-65. That is a slaughter. Um, yeah, you had five players for Bradley in double figures. Timothy Van Der Nap had I just look at his name. He had 2 points, but I love his name. It's just like you see a guy's name and you're immediately like, yes, he's now my favorite player. Um, and that's what I then that's immediately what stuck out to me for Bradley. So I'm immediately rooting for a team that has a guy named Timothy Vander Nap as uh as uh as one of their players. He unfortunately went 0 for 3 from 3. That's sad. But he at least scored. He at least scored. So Connor Dillon led the team off the bench with 20 points. Jaquan Johnson had 17. So Missouri Valley might be Bradley's to lose if this were to keep up. So I mean, if obviously other teams in the conference hit a bit of a dry spell, but um, like Drake, even though they ended up winning last night. So yeah, Bradley is still number one in the conference at 6-1 overall in the conference, and then 15-3 overall on their season. So yeah, Drake, forget the final score, but yeah, they won 66-62 at home against Illinois State. So again, Drake may not be as good as we thought they were, um, despite, being one of the last unbeatens in the mid majors. 66-62 over an Illinois State team who is 2-5 in the Missouri Valley. Um, Yeah, very curious to where the Missouri Valley's going to end up going this year. So yeah, just not entirely sure on that one. But then again, uh, there's still a lot of season to go. So oh yeah, and I forgot to oh yeah, another double overtime game. UIC and Murray State. UIC defeated Murray State in double overtime. So I don't know how I missed that one, but yeah, good on UIC for defeating Murray State, who I believe Murray State, yeah, defeated um, Drake earlier this year. So what a weird season this has been. Um, all right, so yeah, Cleveland State. I also wanted to mention this in the Horizon League. Cleveland State defeated Northern Kentucky 76 to 58. Cleveland State is now 7-1 in the Horizon League. Um, yeah, I really, I mean, Cleveland State's a team I'm gonna need to watch a little bit more, but from what I've seen of them, they've looked pretty solid. So we'll see where they end up going if they end up making the NCAA tournament. So okay, so I wanted to mention, yeah, South Carolina, uh, Oklahoma is now 0-4. South Carolina is now 0-4 after losing to Texas. Um, Arkansas is now. Uh, Yeah, I mean, I talked about Arkansas already, but like they are also just really bad. Any excuse to talk about Arkansas, even though they weren't in action, um, I'll take it because it just shows how they're on levels with Oklahoma and um, and South Carolina now, who are probably two of the I mean, right now, standings wise, like two of the worst teams in the SEC. Um, and yeah, they're they're not. Arkansas and John Calipari are on that level, so that feels good to say. So speaking of the SEC, we have Georgia going on the road against Tennessee. Tennessee, despite trailing at halftime and not having a great first half, ends up pulling away in the second half, winning 74 to 56. Despite a not great shooting night from Chaz Lanier, only had 5 points, 2 of 16 from the floor, so he's really cooled off. Maybe the comparisons to Dalton Connect were a little premature, but Sagai Ziegler had a really nice game. Jordan Gainey, 19 points. Cade Phillips had 10. Jemai Mashak had 11. So Tennessee takes care of business at home against a very upstart Georgia Bulldogs team. Um, they didn't shoot as many free throws as they had in the past couple of games. So people obviously were saying like, you'll ref merchants, all that stuff. Like Georgia's a good team. So I wouldn't go that far, but at the same time, like if they continue to not play as well, and again, it's at Tennessee, so not really too many expectations to win on the road there. But if they continue to not shoot as many free throws or get as many calls, then then we'll definitely be having to take a second look at Georgia. But again, Georgia's been a really good team so far after beating Kentucky, beating Oklahoma on at home. But again, Oklahoma's maybe proven to not be as good as we thought they were. So yeah, Tennessee still 16-1 and 3-1 in the SEC. Um, Still very good. Still going to be near the top of the SEC by the end of the year. Um, and they get a win that they really needed. So a couple of Big Ten games in action. Michigan State defeated Penn State 90 to 85. Despite Ace Baldwin Jr. having 20 points, uh, he's and playing all 40 minutes, which is impressive in and of itself. He's just not. I mean, I he's such a weird defender to me. Um, it's like he has like this like crazy wingspan, and he's very much like in everyone's face trying to get a steal. and but he's just like to me it's like he's not as good of a defender as people thought he was going to be. And I just don't see it. I just don't see it with Ace Baldwin on the defensive end. Like he's a great offensive player. Um, it helps when you get 12 free throw attempts. But yeah, I don't know, man. I just Ace Baldwin is definitely an interesting player to watch. But again, maybe not as good of a defender as people had hoped. And on Michigan State side, Frankie Fiddler had 18. Great name, by the way. Frankie Fiddler. Sounds like a guy from the 50s, like a 50s rockabilly singer. My name's Frankie Fiddler, and my duet with Conway Twitty has just reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts. Joining me today is Luther Perkins, who has been a great guitarist with Johnny Cash. So here we go. Um, I don't know where the hell that came from. Um, but like Frankie Fiddler, great name. Akins had 16 points. Um, and Cohen Carr, who is one of the most invigorating players in college basketball, at least in the Big Ten, with his athleticism at 9 points. Keep watching for Cohen Carr. Like I have a feeling he's gonna break out at some point. Like I have this weird feeling about him that hasn't necessarily vindicated myself yet, but we shall see. Um, Man, I need to like retroactively change my last episode's name in CJ Cox We Trust. Because CJ Cox had 0 points today. Granted, he only had 4 shots and he only took two three-pointers in 21 minutes. Um, but yeah, definitely not the stat line that I thought he was going to have. Um, Especially coming off his great game against Nebraska. Um, I just didn't really it just kind of was kind of a no-show today. It's like a goose egg. So, but Purdue ends up winning 69 to 58 in spite of that. Trey Kaufman ran 19 points. Caleb First had 15, Braden Smith had 17, Fletcher Loyer had 12. So aside from that, all of the other four starters that Purdue had were in double figures. Great Ozabor had 28 for Washington, another great name. I'll be here all day. But Purdue just seems like one of those teams, and you saw that against Minnesota too. And I don't know if it's just a road thing. But again, they also had those games against like Ole Miss and Maryland as well, where they start off pretty slowly. They don't really have a great first half, but then they absolutely kill it in the second half. So this Purdue team might just be like overall just a second half basketball team. And yeah, I mean, I just looking at it from there, I mean, you saw it against Minnesota too, where they likely should have won a bit more convincingly in the first half, but in the second half, they just took full control of that game. So Purdue is now 14-4 despite a rocky non-conference year. They're now 6-1 in the Big Ten, so they're still right up there in those Big Ten standings, along with Michigan State and Michigan, of course. Like they're still in competition. So good on Purdue for getting the road win. I don't have much to say about Houston defeating West Virginia 70 to 54. I mean, West Virginia maybe not as good. But again, Houston is 13-3, 5-0 in the Big Ten. So yeah, West Virginia, I think again, maybe not as good as we thought they were, getting blown out at Houston, but at the same time, they still have talent to compete in a pretty lackluster Big 12. So I'm expecting more wins coming from West Virginia, even still. This game was pretty wild. UNLV at Utah State, there were some bugs with the CBS Sports Network camera where it like I thought my computer was breaking at some point, but then it turned out to be like they just went to like the Skycam for a lot of like the first half, which was really strange. Um, yeah, but UNLV upsets Utah State, so Utah State is no longer undefeated in the Mountain West Conference. This was, I mean, coming days after, um, or maybe a day after New Mexico ends up losing on the road to San Jose State. Utah State now gets gets the loss at UNLV. So Jalen Hill had 15 points to lead UNLV. 6 of 25 from three was UNLV. So they were not very good at shooting the basketball, but they did make a couple more field goals. They shot some more free throws, and that was a pretty big difference. And also only turned it over 7 times. Utah State turned it over 12 times. Mason Falslev did not have a great game, only 8 points. Ian Martinez coming off the great win against Boise State had 15. But yeah, this was just an old-fashioned Mountain West defensive struggle, and we have a lot of those games in the Mountain West. Um, so it's no surprise that this was a final score. Not surprising at all that it was competitive and tough. But UNLV ends up getting the win 65 to 62. Yeah, coming back, in the final minutes too. Because I think they were down by like four with a few minutes to go. And then I think they didn't, I don't think UNLV or Utah State scored again. I think like UNLV scored like the final 7 or 8 points to win the game. Yeah, and Tucker Anderson had 19 points as well. Um, yeah, they they've definitely had a lot of, I mean, especially against Boise State, where they barely pulled that game out. Um, I mean, they were probably bound to let one slip at some point. I don't think it's going to be a recurring theme, uh, but they do need to play better overall, and especially on the road if they expect to get a higher seed in the NCAA tournament. That remains to be seen, but um, yeah, can't have many more slip ups against teams like UNLV. Granted, are 4-2 in the Mountain West, but just 10-7 overall. So yeah, I'm not sure. We shall see on that point. And then we had Kansas and Iowa State, the matchup of the day, at least for ranked teams wise. But it really didn't pan out that way because I just don't think Kansas is that good, and Iowa State is very good, and they were at home, so this result really was not surprising. It's good to see Kansas continue to get humbled. Um, Again, being ranked number one back-to-back seasons and still having like uh, a bit of a lackluster performance like this, losing by 17. Hunter Dickinson, the prized possession, only went 3 of 10 from the floor despite being 7-2 and 0 for 1 from three, 6 points. KJ Adams, 4 points. Dajuan Harris Jr., 8 points. AJ Storr, transfer, 5 points. He did have 2 assists, however. So he is actually like filling up his assist numbers a little bit more. So good on you, AJ Store. Um, Rylan Griffin at 7. But again, overall, there's just so many parallels between this Kansas team and last year's Kansas team. Um, like obviously you had the Grady Dick year 2 years ago, but they looked, at least in the regular season, looked better than they did against, last year's team with their their slide in the Big 12. And this year it just looks the same, man. Especially when you get a performance like this out of Hunter Dickinson and you only have one player who scored in double figures, that was Zeke Mayo. But even then he had an inefficient 17 with 3 of 9 from three, 7 of 19 overall. Like he had to, I mean, he was the only one really scoring all that much, so like he kind of had to, but at the same time, it just like really confusing to me how this Kansas team just like again being number one and you get a fall off like this again. A lot of season to go, but it just looks so similar to last year. And if it does go last year and they have another flame out, it's like you don't obviously, Bill Self is a whether you like him or hate him, he's won two national titles at Kansas. Um, and he's had a lot of, obviously a lot of problems with the NCAA too, but I mean, he's had a lot of success, but you might want to start questioning whether or not he's like, I mean, he won the national championship 3 years ago. I get it. But at the same time, with his recent teams, just haven't looked very good, man. They just haven't looked very good. So we'll see. We'll see if they turn the ship around. But I just have not been impressed with Kansas. But on the other end, Iowa State looks really good. Curtis Jones made a rare start in this game, and had 25 points. So for all the talk about Curtis Jones not being a good starter, being just like the best sixth man in America, um, he's one of the best players in America right now. Curtis Jones, 25 points. Um, Deshaun Jackson had 17. Uh, Joshua Jefferson, Taman Lipsy had 10. Sean Gilbert had 7. Very solid effort from Iowa State. Granted, they did have uh, 14 more free throw attempts than Kansas. But again, Kansas also in their free throw attempts went 4 for 11. So, and then Iowa State went 8 for 13 from three. And then like Curtis Jones buried like this insane logo 3-pointer that was pretty crazy. Taman Lipsy also had a really deep three. Yeah, this Iowa State team is just so good. Um, like, I mean, they are. I mean, last year was a bit of a surprise as to how good they were for a lot of people, but this team is like really, really something. So, I mean, I don't like the only thing that concerns me with Iowa State is their lack of size. But again, holding a guy like Hunter Dickinson to just 6 points is like really good in its own right. So Iowa State, even without Momcilovic, um, really, really played well. So yeah, good on Iowa State for taking care of business at home in a marquee matchup. So we'll see how it ends up going. Um, and not, I don't want to get too ahead. Um, but we do have some great games Friday, some really good games Saturday, which I will talk about on the podcast the next time I host. But on the women's side today, which is Thursday, we have a lot of really good matchups to talk about, and I'll talk about some of yesterday's action too. Obviously, you have Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, South Carolina, Alabama, at Alabama, by the way. So if Alabama could beat South Carolina, that would be a pretty big message to the Gamecocks and Don Staley. Um, it'll be interesting to see how Georgia Tech ends up playing on the road. I think Notre Dame, again, with Hannah Hidalgo, that's pretty tough to. She's pretty tough to beat. Notre Dame's been really tough to beat at home this year. They have a lot of great quality wins. Um, so we shall see how that ends up working out. Um, Texas goes on the road at Auburn. Oklahoma and Tennessee are both hosting games. I've talked about the schedule already, but again, it's worth reiterating that uh, today's slate, which is the 16th for women's basketball, is pretty exciting. So make sure to check that out. Yesterday, UCLA, despite trailing in the first quarter against an 0-6, now 0-7 Penn State team at home, um, UCLA ends up pulling away. Lauren Betts had 22 and 12 and 7 blocks, which is, again, as an IU fan, I know very well how dominant she can be. Um, yeah, just incredible, incredible talent. UConn went on the road and beat St. John's. I don't have much to say. Paige Becker's only had 12 points, but still won 71 to 45. Not much of a surprise. It wouldn't surprise me if UConn again went undefeated in the Big East. They did last year. Uh, West Virginia won at home. against Colorado, 73 to 46. This was pretty funny to me though, because Colorado was leading by 7 after the first quarter, 22 to 15, and then Colorado scored 2 points in the second quarter. Two, two. That is crazy to me. And for a team with Frida Foreman, uh, you would think that they would play a little bit better. Um, but I guess not, man. West Virginia is pretty good. JJ Quinterly at 19, Sydney Shaw at 19 to lead West Virginia. But yeah, aside from Foreman, no one else really played all that well for Colorado, and it really showed because they only scored 2 points in the second quarter. They scored 6 points in the fourth quarter as well. And that's what really um, blew the game open for the Mountaineers. So, and then I don't have much to say either about Michigan State beating Rutgers because Rutgers is really bad in women's basketball. And Michigan State's pretty good, 14 and 3, 4 and 2 in the Big Ten. Um, so yeah, Michigan State's pretty good this year. Wouldn't surprise me if they were kind of like a sneaky kind of pick um, in the uh, by the time March Madness comes around. So we shall see. On that note, I think my voice is like I don't think I'm sick or anything, but it's like I'm my throat is definitely sore as I've been talking. I don't know if you all uh, noticed that, but so I think I'm going to have to end the recording here. I wanted to talk a little bit more, uh, but I think if I continue talking, I'm going to like sound just hoarse and you all would not be able to understand me. So I think I'm going to end that here. But yeah, thank you all very much for listening. 20th episode for those of you who have been uh, listeners since the beginning. Thanks again. And if you're just listening now, also thank you. So regardless, the support really helps, and hopefully this podcast can continue to grow. So thank you all very much. I will see you all next time again tonight. A lot of women's basketball action. Make sure to check that out. I think Indiana also plays as well tonight against who do they play? Do they play Illinois? If so, that would be a bounce back game. Hopefully, yeah, they play Illinois and it would be nice to get to avenge the men's team for the blowout that they suffered at the hands of Illinois. And then they play USC at home on Sunday, the 19th. Very excited for that. I mean, I think USC is going to win, but we shall see. Um, also, okay, do they play? Is it at the State Farm Center or is it at home? Because I'm getting, no, it's at Assembly Hall. Okay. So yeah, it is at Assembly Hall. Uh, both games this week for the women's team, for the IU women's team, and then they go on the road at Oregon at Washington. So looking forward to that. Think they'll beat Illinois, then they probably lose to USC, but hope they win both. So anyway, take care, you all. I will see you all next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and rest of your week, potentially. So, all right, take care, all. Bye bye.